It's a great hymn to conclude my sermon series on superpowers. Today will be the last Sunday I'll be doing that because I'll be gone next Sunday. Dakota will be filling the pulpit. So today is it. So I want to read to you the part of the first verse of the song we just sang. God of grace and God of glory, on thy people pour thy power. Do you feel more powerful after this summer? I do, in some ways. So let's conclude with our last one. I'm not a self-help guru by any stretch of the imagination, but here's something worth remembering. If someone begins a sentence with the words, "I'm going to be honest with you," you should ask them, "Have you been lying up to this point?" It's supposed to be a joke. Let's talk about the superpower of honesty. The reason I think we can call it a superpower because it seems to be in short supply these days. Truth seems to be more fluid than it used to be. I don't know. But this may sound strange to you, but maybe we've come by our dishonesty honestly. Does that make sense? We've come by our dishonesty honestly. What I mean by that is that dishonesty might be a natural human trait. It might be natural for us as human beings to be dishonest on many occasions. You may have heard it said, "Why lie when the truth will do?" But I think the human species actually lives more by the credo, "Why tell the truth when a lie will do?" And it's not just us humans that are very good at lying, so are non-humans. And I'm not talking about your pets. You remember the 1978 film Superman? The alien man in blue tights and a red cape. He's in his first interview with Lois Lane, who becomes his girlfriend, of course. And he tells her that he is here to fight for truth and justice and the American way. And Lois Lane looks at him and laughs and said, "Well, then you're going to be fighting against every elected official in America." Now, generally, we see Superman as a person of high moral integrity. The Boy Scouts used him a lot in their materials and so forth over the years. But remember this when you're thinking about Superman. He spends all of his time hiding his true identity. That's sort of lying by omission, right? Not commission. He's not committing a lie, but he's omitting the truth. So, what does that say about us? Psychologists have really tried to determine whether we are more prone to be honest or to lie or stretch the truth when the truth is not exactly pain-free, when it makes us uncomfortable or when it's inconvenient. And so there was a study done not long ago by a psychologist named Joshua Green and his graduate student, Joseph Paxton. They set out to answer that question: are human beings inherently honest or dishonest? So what they did is they gathered up a group of participants to experiment with a coin toss, a very simple experiment. And part of the time, they had a large pool of people. Part of the time they said, "Okay, before you toss the coin, call it heads or tails." Okay? And then we'll see what happens. So what would you think is sort of the percentage that they got the coin toss right, that they were accurate? It'd been 50%, right? If you do it enough times, tossing a coin, calling it, it's going to be 50% over enough time. Then sometimes they were told, "Don't tell us what you think it's going to be. Tell us after the coin is tossed whether or not it was accurate, that you were accurate." And guess what the results were? They were 80% accurate. Somebody was lying. There was some lying going on. So when it was done up front, everybody knew it was about 50%. But when they were allowed to tell the experimenters after they tossed the coin whether they guessed it right or not, 80% of the time they were right. So somebody was lying. And the interesting twist in all this, the entire time their brains were hooked up to an MRI scanner. There was a brain scan. And so the experimenters could actually read their brain waves or whatever, and they could tell who was lying and who wasn't. And really the most interesting thing that came out of this study was that the brain scan showed that the brains of the people who were telling the truth, even though it was they'd guessed wrong, the brains of those who told the truth and said, I got it wrong, worked harder than those who told a lie. Their brains were working harder to tell the truth than those who told a lie. In other words, honesty requires more work. And again, this is especially true when truth, whatever it is sort of painful or uncomfortable. So honesty is hard work. And therefore, it's a superpower to have honesty. We're fighting against our human nature to be honest. I think this is one reason why Jesus and the gospel writers, the people in the early church, why they were so remarkable in what they did. Because the writers of the New Testament, they go out of their way to be honest, to come clean and tell the truth about how difficult it is, how painful it can be to follow Jesus. They were upfront about it. It was especially difficult to follow Jesus in that time and place. You could not, there's no way to hide it. It was very painful. And so in both of our New Testament readings today, we see this honesty coming through. I'm going to begin with the reading from Luke. In Luke's gospel, Jesus comes clean with all of how painful it is to follow him when he tells this crowd of potential disciples that joining his movement will create a lot of conflict in their lives, especially within their own families. Because think of all the dynamic that was happening back then. There were no Christian families, right? So Jesus was calling people out of their particular religious tradition into his movement. And of course, later on, when the church is really percolating, it was even more difficult, which we'll look at in a moment. But he talks about bringing fire to the earth. That's why he came to bring fire to the earth, which is a symbol for destruction. And also he said, I've come to create division rather than peace. So he illustrates that by saying that there will likely be family discord in your lives. If not separation, parents and children, they'll turn against one another if they go in different directions. In-laws will become outlaws to one another, which is a natural, normal thing, right? But even more so, exacerbated when you're talking about religion. And this really reflects the reality that on the ground in the first century when Luke was writing his gospel decades after Jesus. Because this new Jewish sect, which was derogatorily referred to as Christianity, that wasn't a good term, that was a bad term back then. It was splitting families and communities apart. Well, we know that even today in our world, this sort of thing can also happen, although it's usually not as severe. Some of you can probably attest to a little bit of religious conflict within your own families. Maybe there's a Catholic-Protestant divide in your family that creates some discord. Maybe you different kinds of Protestants, so to speak. My own story is that I think I'm the first mainline Protestant in my family, which consists solely of evangelicals and Catholics in my family back home. So they look at me a little cross-eyed at times. They don't know what to think about me. And some of you have heard me tell this story. It's one of my favorite stories. I hate doing it to you, but I'm going to say it again. It's late 1989. I just received a call. I'd just gone to Baylor in my first semester, and I was looking for a church. And I was looking at first for a Baptist church, couldn't find one. So I decided to try the United Church of Christ because I knew about them, and I thought I really wanted to try that. And lo and behold, I landed a couple of yoked congregations outside of Waco. And I called my mom, who's a Southern Baptist. I said, hey, Mom, I got a church. And she said, oh, good. Is it a Baptist church? And I said, no, Mom, it's United Church of Christ. And she said, you're a Church of Christ minister? Because, Church of Christ and Baptists don't like each other down there. I don't know why. It's something to do with baptism. Anyway, I said, no, Mom, it's United Church of Christ. And she paused, and then she said, well, is that a cult? And I said, yeah, it's a cult, of course. So this movement that became known as Christianity it can still divide people, right? Just like all religions can. Conflict in a faith context is inevitable. People who make a sincere commitment to their religion that will often cause conflict in their families. And Jesus knew this to be true. He didn't try to hide it under the camel rug, right? He knew it was true, and so he came clean about it. He spoke with honesty. He had the superpower of honesty. And then when we heard from the New Testament letter to the Hebrews, and this writer gets even more honest about what's going on. He kind of scans through the history of Israel, and he said, faith is that which helped them to get through all kinds of bad stuff, like Egyptian slavery and Babylonian exile and all that sort of thing. He mentions how they were also able to do some great things throughout the centuries, but in the midst of that, they were persecuted, they were tortured, mocked, imprisoned, they were killed in all kinds of terrible ways. And by the way, that really is repeated in the life of Jesus later on. That's exactly what happened to him. And then if you fast forward 20 centuries, we see it really in the genocide known as the Holocaust in the 20th century, and all kinds of pogroms and all kinds of tortures and things like that in between. So the fact that people have to suffer for their faith is not exactly a dirty little secret. People have known about it all the time. Everybody knows about it. And so the writer of Hebrews talks about a cloud of witnesses. And these are the martyrs who can absolutely attest to the truth that faith can be a risky business. So we know that. Historically, we know that. But I hate to say this, but there are some preachers and there are churches today who are out there who are not telling the truth. They're just not telling the truth. They're telling their congregations that if they have enough faith, all it takes, you can quantify faith. If you have enough faith, then everything will be hunky-dory. It'll all be great. Some of them promise wealth. Some promise health. They make promises that cannot be met, and while they do that, they rake in a ton of cash. That's how they operate. They do not have the superpower of honesty. You and I think, if we're going to be true to our calling to Jesus, we need to be willing to tell the truth about Christianity and religion in general, but Christianity in particular, which is, not every prayer will be answered. Not every loved one will be healed. Not every relationship will be successful. Not every family will be functional. Not every bank account will be flush. Not every pew, obviously, will be filled, and not every promise will be fulfilled. The truth, I know, is often painful, which is why honesty is a faith superpower. Because we are, if the studies are correct that I just mentioned earlier, we are prone to tell whoppers rather than give the exact length and weight of a fish that we just caught. We have a tendency to embellish our golf handicap, fudge on our taxes, use a younger and more flattering profile pic for an online dating service, sneak a peek at our smart classmates' test answers. Maybe what we need is Wonder Woman's golden lariat. Are you familiar with her lariat? It's sort of her Amazonian lie detector. Here's how it works. She sees a bad guy, she lassos him, and while in her grasp, he comes clean. He has to tell the truth. He reveals everything about himself. And while he's doing all of his darkest secret, he hates himself because he can't believe he's doing this, but the lasso makes him do that. Wouldn't it be great if we had Wonder Woman's golden lariat? For a lot of settings, let's say, presidential campaigns, Senate confirmation hearings, conversations with loved ones, co-workers, auto mechanics, a very convincing middle schooler. Wouldn't you love to have that golden lariat? But we don't have that. And so what we have to do is very simple. Learn to spot dishonesty, not only in others, but in ourselves as best we can, because apparently it's inherent within all of us. And we should also be on the lookout for truly honest people, if for no other reason than to keep us honest. Trustworthy people, truthful people are a gift to the world. Because they tell the truth, even when the truth hurts, we are able to breathe more freely in their presence because we know we're not being buffaloed, bamboozled, conned, or duped. So, when you find an honest person in your life, lasso them and hold on to them for dear life because they are the real superheroes of the world. Amen.